Corruption win. Corruption versus Crimson. It's been debated for a really long time, but I'm just going to list the pros and cons of each one. First of all, disclaimer, I like the Corruption way more because of the weapons, so this is going to be a little bit biased. So first of all, Ichor versus Curse Flames. Ichor is almost always better for both melee and summoner because lowering defense is absolutely huge, especially for getting it right out of hard mode. But for archers and mage, neither is better because they don't apply to the actual bow itself. But Ichor bullets / arrows do still exist, so it's definitely the better pick for archer, summoner, and melee. But for mage, it doesn't really matter since neither apply. Ichor bullets and arrows are quickly outclassed by Chlorophyte, but they are definitely still worth it because you can get them right out of hard mode. You can get them right out of pre-hard mode, and they deal a lot of damage, especially for the destroyer. Next up is the Crimson versus Corruption weapons. So first of all, the musket is better just because of base damage. Well, not because of base damage, but rather because of the critical chance. You can get critical chance is very useful in the early game because crits deal a lot of damage. But the Undertaker fires faster, so they're about the same. Next up is the Ball of Hurt versus the Rotten Fork. The Ball of Hurt deals far more damage and is good for the Eater of Worlds, but I like the Rotten Fork because it's also good for the Brain of Cthulhu and it offers amazing range damage pretty quickly in the game, especially since you can just get dynamite early on and then get it quickly. And also flails, in my opinion, are hard to use, so I'm definitely gonna give this one to the Rotten Fork. Next up is the Vilethorn versus the Crimson Rod. First of all, I do have to say, I think both of them are absolutely ass. Because the Vilethorn, while it does deal piercing damage, it also doesn't really deal a lot of damage. But the Crimson Rod is even worse because it just... Look at it. But no, the actual reason is because unless you can go just directly above it for a long enough time, it doesn't really deal a lot of damage to anything. Next up is the Scourge of the Corruptor versus Vampire Knives. Both of them are actually really good weapons that are very worth it to get. But I think the Vampire Knives are better for melee class that aren't really that tanky. So like menacing builds, maybe even just pure attack builds, maybe even just defense, maybe even just mining builds. But if you put everything into warding, then the Scourge of the Corruptor is better just because of the base damage and the homing. Alright. Crimson versus Corruption in fun. I think the Corruption is more entertaining, or is more fun rather, because of the Eater. I like the Eater a lot because the Ball of Hurt is really good for it if you can find the clumped up version really quickly. Just like the Drippler Crippler versus the Destroyer. But I think the Brain of Cthulhu is better and more fun because the Brain of Cthulhu is much easier. Next up is the actual boss of the biome. The Eater of Worlds is harder most of the time because of Vile Spit, but it also gives you the Warm Scarf, which is a great addition to your accessories, reducing damage taken by 17%, which is actually really good for hardcore playthroughs. But if you prefer the less consistent dodge chance of the Brain of Confusion, then it's still very possible to get it in a Crimson world. As I already said, the Brain of Cthulhu is most likely the easier boss of the two, so it's much easier to get a Brain of Confusion, and it's also very good for the it's very good for pretty much the entire game. I don't really know why I said mechanical bosses specifically. And also, if you like having dodge chances, like myself, then I think the Brand of Confusion is better because of Master Ninja Gear and the Cross Necklace and Hollowed Armor. And probably more I'm forgetting. Overall, a lot of people say that if you want a short playthrough that is more I'm trying to think of a term. The Crimson is better for an easier playthrough, but the Corruption is better for a longer playthrough. And I agree with it tenfold, because the Crimson has Ichor, Vampire Knives, the Rotted Fork, and the Undertaker, and the Brand of Confusion. But Corruption has some of my favorite weapons, like the Scourge of the Corruptor, Vilethorn, which I do like, even though it's kind of bad, and the Musket. Overall, which one is better? It depends on your preference, but in my opinion, the Scourge of the Corruptor makes Corruption win